All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back once again to the third session of the world's first virtual implant expo. Today is day 3. We're very happy to have you once again back for another power pack session on the topic tips and tricks in the practice of dental implantology, a clinician's perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have with us Dr. Sundara Well from Madurai. Dr. Sundarawell is a maxillofacial surgeon and an implantologist who has been practicing since the last 15 years. He's an associate professor at the Ultra Dental College, which is based in Madurai, India. He's also the founder of Dentalent Academy, an academy which nourishes and which makes budding implantologists tune themselves into finest implantologists. He has successfully trained several hundred dentists from India and all across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you Dr. Sundara Well.
Good afternoon, one and all. Greetings from Madurai, popularly known as the Athens of the East. So before beginning with the presentation, I'd like to thank Professor Dr. Johnson Raja sir for providing me this opportunity to speak on this online elite platform. Sometimes it would be better if I spoke upon or rather answered questions that I asked myself in my initial days of practice. So my career graph, like everybody else, started off with single implants. Had tough time sourcing the implants, the kits, and where to get the prosthetic work done. So all these were the hurdles that I faced in my initial days of practice. So somehow against all odds, I made it happen and the implant restoration was done. This gave me a huge moral boost and I started doing multiple teeth restoration with implants and finally a full mouth rehabilitation. So all's well that ends well. But did it really end well? So as you can see, a patient reported to me after a few months saying that the crown started to shake. So I went back to the textbook and the textbook told me this is the most common complication, so you need not worry. But when the patient came to clinic, these were the questions. I spent so much, you didn't even chew anything and it started to shake already. My neighbor said, don't try anything new. Another dentist he knew of has done a replacement 10 years ago. You know, the wire partial denture is very popular at this area of the globe where we practice. And they tend to say it still works without any problem. You shouldn't have gone to your new dentist. Your dentist has cheated you. You should go and ask him for a refund. No, these are all something which is not there in the textbook. And I believe most of you would have had patients at some point of time who ask these questions. And this will be the status of the dentist. Oh my God, what have I done wrong? Is it good or is it wise that I chose implant for the restoration, or should I have gone for a regular fixed partial denture and never tried anything new? But it didn't end there. You can see, you will possibly see complications like this: ceramic chipping, the abutment failure. You can see the restoration getting debonded from the abutment. The bonding has not been good and get debonded at the abutment restoration interface. The worst complication, failure of an implant, chipping again, loss of acrylic tooth. This happens when you do a lot of hybrids. You are bound to see this complication at some point of time. Unfavorable angulation of implant placement, faulty impressions, faulty models, breakage of the acrylic hybrid, unfavorable placement of implant. You can see it is too close to the adjacent tooth, implant displacement inside, implant encroaching the inferior alveolar canal, impinging the adjacent tooth. The list goes on and on. So should I quit or did I quit? So instead of facing all these complications, we would think it is better to go for a fixed partial denture or a removable partial denture, which doesn't give so much of complication. But I did not quit. A person who's never made a mistake, has never tried anything new, and we have this never say die attitude. And failure is the first attempt in learning. So I went back to my basics and realized that any procedure has got 2 or 3 different school of thoughts and different approach. And I attended a lot of lectures and meetings and training sessions. And I later learned that there is not one ideology that will suit everybody universally. So I went on to learn to customize my approach with the target of minimizing the complications for patients and with the aim of giving a predictable restoration. So the more I explored, the more I realized that there are more controversies in the field than there are any consensus. So with this, implantology. So with what little experience that I have gained, I'm here to present with you the tips and tricks in the trade of dental implantology. So I am Dr. Sundaravel, consultant that I have changed after seeing all these complications. So after doing this for the past 5-6 years, the amount of complications that we encounter in our implant restorations have drastically come down. So this is my own recipe. You take a little bit of egg, some onions, some parota, mix it together like this, and you have some special plates with which this is mixed. And in the end, you have the Madurai famous Kuttu Parota to serve. So people who haven't tasted this, you do please come to Madurai sometime and taste this. This is a delicacy of Madurai. To make things simple, I have segregated the presentation into 3 parts: the patient clinical relation, surgical aspect, and the prosthetic aspect. So I'm going to answer the 5 most common dilemmas which I faced in my initial days of practice. Of course, implant is an ocean, and I know I'm only scratching the surface in this presentation, but it's worth a start. Once patient comes in, we need to know what to look out for. So to start with clinical evaluation, the first and foremost thing that one have to look for is the presence of restorative space. So I've had numerous phone calls from many of the clinics that I go for consultation. They convince the patient for implant, but when I go there for consultation, see the patient, I see there is absolutely no restorative space. So what I feel is very important for a clinician is to check for the presence of restorative space even before you decide on treatment or convince the patient for an implant. So these are all the few cases that I've shown on the right where there is adequate restorative space. The green line marks the adequate restorative space in the vertical dimension. You can see vertical dimension, and also adequate restorative space in the horizontal dimension, or rather the bucco-palatal width. So these are cases, most of the time you don't get ideal cases in your clinic. These are the kind of scenarios which I believe you all will face when you start your practice. There is definitely no adequate restorative space in almost 50 to 60% of the cases that we see. So you can see there is supraeruption of the opposing teeth in the first picture. There's a loss of restorative space. And in this particular case, you see the patient has encountered a trauma. There has been loss of labial cortex, and you see there is no adequate palato-buccal width. And in the last case, the patient is with a deep bite. The lower teeth are almost invisible. And these are all the cases which walk into your practice, and you will need to plan restoration for such cases. So you can see the defect. I have marked with dotted arrows. This is where the ideally it should have been, but fortunately or unfortunately, you don't have it. The second most important thing which many people miss out is the presence of mouth opening. The patient should have adequate mouth opening. So most of the time in the posterior mandible, I see patients, they restrict or they refuse to open the mouth. So these are all patients who are very scared about the procedure. So all you have to do is sit with them, talk with them for some time and alleviate the affair, and then maybe they'll cooperate for procedure. But if you do not find adequate mouth opening, it is very difficult to go ahead with placement of implants. So the third most thing is ridge evaluation. So almost all the ridge evaluation is being done with the cone beam CT now. But in places where cone beam CT is not there, you can still use your OPG and IOPA. The only problem with these kind of radiographs is that you get the dimensions only in 2 planes. whereas the depth or the width of the ridge cannot be assessed with the OPG or IOPA, and you need a CBCT for that. So when you are planning with the CBCT, you can use these radiographic templates that are given by the implant companies. So all you have to do is place this over the ridge, and you can choose the implant size for that particular patient. Ridge mapping is an invasive type of assessment of ridge, which has got, I'm just mentioning here just for the sake of completion. Almost nobody does it nowadays just because it is invasive. You need to apply topical anesthesia, and you have specialized calipers to measure the width like this. Since it's invasive, it has almost gone out of the picture nowadays. So these three modalities, the one that I use most commonly is the cone beam CT. Almost for all my implant restorations, I use this cone beam CT because it's become relatively inexpensive now, and the patient can really afford it, and you get loads of data for the amount that is going to spend. I would recommend you to spend some time with your oral medicine colleagues and learn how to read a cone beam CT. Never rely on the center's report. It is always better you open up the CD yourself and do the study on your own. So you get the data in axial, the coronal, and the sagittal plane, and you also have a three-dimensional reconstruction, which is possible with the cone beam CT. And the green lines are not that very visible, but still you have a tool to measure the length and width at the place where you want to place the implants. And you also have a virtual implant interface. After selecting the length and width, all you have to do is select the implant system that you want, and that gets integrated with the three-dimensionally reconstructed cone beam CT image, and you get virtual placement of implant on your laptop itself. So after you get this kind of information, implementation, I don't think it is a big challenge for anybody. So all you need is a little bit of surgical skills, and you do all the plannings on your system. Implementation on the day of surgery is going to be really simple. So blood investigation. So this, after you finish your micro or macro evaluation in the oral cavity, it is good practice to do an overall assessment of the patient. So what I normally do is advise the patient to go for this blood investigation, which includes hemoglobin, your complete blood cell count, your random blood sugar, your urea levels, creatinine, and of late you need to add the corona investigation as well. So the most common general condition that I face in my practice is either the patient is a known diabetic, or has been undergone some kind of cardiac procedure and is under treatment for the same. So if at all you encounter any such medical practice, you can always add or substitute certain of these investigation with some advanced investigation for that. So as far as diabetes is concerned, I always ask the patient to get a glycosylated hemoglobin or an HbA1c, and I proceed with my implant treatment only if the HbA1c level is 7 or below. And moreover, once you gives you a fair idea of what the mentality the patient is, and you can screen the patients who's come in for a window shopping, and you can actually select the patient who's really interested to undergo the treatment. So the next most common question that people ask me is, what implant system do I use? So once the evaluation is over, the patient himself is going to ask you what is going to be my budget, and without knowing or choosing what implant system that you are going to use, very difficult to answer that question. So if you ask me what implant system is my order of preference, there are a numerous amount of implants in the market nowadays. As you can see, I have put a few pictures of a few commonly available systems present in this part of the country. Each one has their own way of marketing and their strategy, their claim different, their unique selling points. But if you ask me my order of preference, the first one would be availability. So I don't go with brands. I usually go for the implant that is available in the market. So previously we used to keep stocks. If you ask people who started implant practice 10 years ago, we were asked to keep stocks of implant. We used to have at least 30 to 50 implants with us all the time. So we never know when the patient is going to come in and agree for an implant. So we always we wanted to be ready, never to miss out on those cases. But nowadays I don't stock those implants because it has become really cumbersome, and the availability also is much more easily available. Most of the implants are available the next day. So you place order today, the next day you can get it in your hand. So my first order of preference will always be the availability, and the second one is the prosthetic support, because you see there are a lot of systems, because they don't have all the prosthetic component availability in hand. So what they will ask you to do is place an order, or you ask them, they will ask you to place an advance, and the prosthetic component is imported. No, those kind of things don't work for me in my practice. I always go for a system which has got good prosthetic support. The third and the most important thing is the lab support. So once after you choose the implant and you get your prosthetic components, you need some lab which can work in collaboration with you, who can understand your needs and fabricate a restoration with whatever components that you supply. A good lab support is required for you to finish your case, because whatever skills you have, or whatever patient correlation, or I mean your development that you the relation that you develop with the patient, it all depends on the kind of crown that the lab is going to give you. So be very stringent with the lab that you choose, and you should be demanding with the kind of work that you extract from them. And the fourth thing that I would like to mention here is the component availability. You should have the component availability in the market for 10 years minimum. So why I'm saying that, I will tell you as I proceed. So once you have all these four in place, you can give a very predictable and beautiful results like this, a predictable restoration. And yeah, who would not want to have a restoration like this? But as you move on, these are all the kind of complications which I showed in the earlier stages. So you will see these complications later in life, 4 years, 5 years down the lane, 7 years, 10 years down the lane. The patient will turn up to you saying the tooth has dislodged, or there has been a fracture in the restoration. Any type of complication can happen. So that is why I told you it's very important to have the component availability at least for 10 years, because you will have to repair these and get back to the patient. If the component is not available, then you are going to have a nightmare treating these patients. So the fifth thing, what I would like to discuss is the immediate versus delayed concept. The immediate versus delayed can be discussed under three perspectives. The first is the patient-doctor perspective, because I have patients coming in because once they get convinced for implants, the implant is definitely going to cost 3 times more than what a normal restoration would otherwise cost them. And once they pay so much, and actually their expectation levels also go high. So what they ask is they want immediate replacement. They say, I'm paying so much, so why do I have to wait for 3 months, 6 months, etc.? I want to get it restored in a day's time. So you need to be very clear about what is possible with this, and communicate with this even before you start the patient with the treatment, and make sure he understands all that. It is a good practice to involve his attenders when you discuss all this. And nowadays I spend a lot of time with my patient discussing all the pros and cons. And once I am convinced that he has understood everything, only then I move with the treatment plan. And it's always delayed. I tell the patient to ask him to wait for the integration to happen before I do the prosthetic loading. So as far as the surgical perspective is concerned, this is one particular case which I would like to discuss with you. I know most of the cases that we see today, they are from abroad. They have come to India for visiting their family, or here for say only 1 week or 10 days, and they are flying back again. So this is one case where the patient reported to me with the root stems in 1/6, and he wanted to go for an implant. So since he was very short of time, he wasn't ready to get it extracted and wait till the healing to happen. So what we did was we went ahead with extraction and placement of implant on the same visit. But I was very skeptic about this treatment plan, and I discussed a lot with the patient. I told a lot of things can go wrong when the extraction is being done. I can either fracture the buccal cortex, even though how much ever careful we are, complications can happen. The root stems the extraction may not be as atraumatic as we would like or want it to be. The defect that we may end up after the extraction is over, it may not be favorable for placement of an implant. So all this was explained to him, and he agreed for it. And fortunately, after the extraction, I was able to place implant in the palatal socket, and desirable Newton of 40 Newton torque I was able to achieve after placement of the implant. So you can see a little bit of grafting was done in the jumping distance. A little bit of sinus lift also was done, as you can see in the OPG. I mean, I was happy with the way the surgery went. So I would advise you, once you start doing implants, you gain considerable experience. Only then you go with immediate implant placement. So extraction and placement of an immediate implant can be done only after you have mastered or at least gained a little bit of experience with implantology, and make sure you communicate all the things that can go wrong with the patient even before you start the case. Don't promise anything on, I usually don't promise anything when I'm going to place an immediate implant, extract and placement of immediate implant. Yes, it can be done. So I have highlighted it in yellow color. But if you are a beginner, it is always better to extract, leave it, and once the healing has happened, 15 and go for your traditional placement of implant. So as far as the prosthetic perspective is concerned, I almost never do an immediate loading. Advancement, technological advancement, and understanding of implant has improved a lot, and there are a lot of people who have been doing this immediate loading, placement of implant, immediate loading. They load it in 2 days, 3 days time, but still I'm not very confident about that treatment modality, and I always prefer to delay or wait for the integration to happen. So sharing one such case where you can see implants are placed in the maxilla and the mandible. Mandible I usually wait for 3 months, and maxilla I wait for 4 to 5 months. And once the integration is over, you can see the impression is taken, beautiful healing. So that's the end of third postoperative year, fifth postoperative year. You follow this protocol, the bone loss is very, very minimal, and the postoperatively, the patient is very happy. Complication rates are to a minimal. So coming to the surgical part, the first question that I would like to address or answer is whether to go for a freehand surgery or to go for. If you're a beginner, definitely you will have to go for freehand surgery. A very well planned surgery, we can achieve the predictable results, and the set goals can be achieved with a freehand surgery itself. But the thing is, you need to practice or master the art of reading a CBCT, and the planning has to be done at least 1 or 2 days prior, not on the day of surgery, and definitely not on the table when the patient is given local. No, don't do the planning or any changes in the treatment plan that has been formulated earlier. It is better you don't change it on the chair, because the patient trust is going to be breached once you do that. So you plan it well beforehand, and you practice placing. I mean, what I do is I mentally prepare or orient myself even before the surgery is started. The implant sizes are ready, the backup implants are ready, and then we start, and usually it goes off like a cakewalk. So whatever you plan can be executed without much of a complication. So guided, why I'm saying it's not easy, because it's not as easy as it sounds. Because if you are a beginner, it is going to involve a lot of expertise and training. Again, the added expense, which as a beginner you may not be able to afford that. So you need to have very good knowledge about the CBCT. You need to have very good knowledge about CAD/CAM. You need to require to master the art of formulating a treatment plan using this guided method. I don't agree with somebody else doing the treatment plan for you, because the patient has come to you trusting you. And I always prefer if you have all these things under the operator's control, rather than some implant company or some other doctor sitting elsewhere doing the planning for you. A lot of things can go wrong with this, and you invest much of time and money in this, you cannot afford the complications. But if you are an expert, I mean, you have placed more than 100 plus implants and you have restored it successfully, this is definitely the future, because it saves a lot of. I'll know the reduced surgical time is what is going to cause less complications for the patient. So the second most commonly asked question or surgical point of view, flap versus flapless. What do you advocate? A lot of companies which says that once it is planned with guided surgery, you don't have to raise a flap. All you have to do is punch, and the implant can be placed easily. But I don't agree with it. If you are a beginner, I would always prefer you to raise a full-fledged flap, and I would recommend you to go for a little bit of surgical training before you start your implant practice, because it is mandatory for you to know how to raise a flap, raise a good flap, and also very mandatory to have good suturing skills, because this I feel is a basic requisites before you start your implant practice. And the flap, what flap to use for the case, it depends on number of implants and various other factors. But all the flap, they are going to fall under 3 categories, which includes the envelope flap, the triangular or the trapezoidal flap, So envelope flap is the one which I have used in this respiration for the maxilla and the mandible. You can see there's one releasing incision, I mean one crystal incision, and you get adequate exposure with this. Fine, you can stop with that. But if you feel the exposure is not enough, you release on one particular side, it is going to raise a triangular flap. And if you feel the exposure is still not enough, you can see that I have released the incision on both sides and adequate exposure. Now you get good amount of exposure, and it is always a good practice to see both the cortex, reflect well, visualize both the cortex before you start drilling. So in this way, a lot of surgical complication intraoperatively can be avoided. The third most commonly asked question or the issue that I would like to address is whether to go for a graft or a graftless solution. So I would like to share this case, which I did about some 5-6 years back. Again, a patient who has lost his tooth because of trauma. There were some root stems present, some kind of respiration was attempted earlier, but that too failed. So we anticipated to have a ridge resorption both in the vertical and the labiolingual direction. So we went in for grafting, an autograft mixed with allograft with enriched with PRP. So all those stuff were done. A membrane was placed and closure was done. So once you do this grafting, what you have to do is you'll have to wait for the graft to take up or mineralize. It usually takes 5 to 6 months of time. So only after the 6 months time can you go for an implant placement. But in this particular case, I realized even after you waiting for after the overgrafting and waiting for 6 months, on the day of opening it up for implant, you still have a residual defect which is going to remain. And I mean, this is not the ideal ridge that I would have wanted after doing the graft. And I realized the grafting is a procedure which is highly unpredictable. So we get extensive training in the field of grafting because as oral and maxillofacial surgeon, we do this day in, day out. But as a beginner or as a general practitioner who has not got that much of exposure with grafting, so I wanted to try or experiment with solutions which are graftless. So I tried this. I started reading a lot of articles which randomized controlled trials which say that grafting and enriching with PRP or PRF is not going to give you any statistically significant improvement in integration. So I thought, okay, well, let's try a case with without grafting. So in this particular case, again, stems I extracted, a defect was anticipated, and I placed implants. The only secret is that these implants were placed with the initial loading torque of 40 newtons. So if there is anything less than 40 newton, in my experience, I have seen those implants fail miserably. So the target of 40 newtons of primary loading needs to be achieved when you are doing such case. And in this particular case, I almost did no grafting at all. The jumping distance was left as it is. Of course, a little bit of resorption did happen, but the implants integrated well. Cement retain processes was planned. And yes, an acceptable final respiration. The form and function is what is very important. End of the day, the patient wanted a respiration that is possible as early. And such young patients post-trauma, they are not ready to wait for 6 months of grafting, then 6 months of loading, and almost losing a year with. So they want their respiration to happen as early as possible. So you need to discuss all this. So whatever possibly can go wrong with these kind of procedures, it is better to inform the patient beforehand. And if the patient agrees, yes, well, you can proceed with graftless solution. So grafting, I would say, is a procedure which you should know, you should be ready to do it, but you cannot avoid it altogether. Try to finish off your case with as less a grafting procedure as possible. So once you go do your simple respirations, your multiple tooth respiration, the next thing that you want to do is your full mouth rehabilitation. So it's the dream of any beginner to go for a full mouth rehabilitation. And once you give the respiration, you ask the patient for the feedback. They come back and tell you, I've never chewed like this in my entire life. And to see such kind of comments from your patients after you do a full mouth rehabilitation. Yes, it is a dream of all practitioners to do a full mouth rehabilitation, but it is better you have a little bit of knowledge about all this all-on-4 or all-on-6. Because the most common question that I face myself, or the question that I have been asking is this. So the patient has agreed for a full mouth rehabilitation, but right now is running low on budget. So is it okay if we go for all-on-4 instead of all-on-6? So thereby you can reduce 4 implants and maybe the cost can come down and the patient will agree for treatment. I would say definitely no, because this, I understand this is going to be the first question that any practitioner will face in their practice, but unfortunately, the treatment plan, the order of preference, the budget comes at last. A lot of indications and contraindications, and they have their own special way of restoring these all on 6 and all on 4 treatment modalities. So these are two different cases that I would like to share with you. The one you see on top, you can see the restorative space. So I marked it with yellow lines. And when compared to the case on the lower one, you can see this has got an increased restorative space. The one on above has got a minimal restorative space. The one on below has got an increased restorative space. So restorative space is what determines the number of implants or the kind of restoration that is possible for the patient. So why? Because if you have a reduced restorative space, in this restorative space, whether be it less or more, the thing that you have to accommodate is the implant goes inside the bone. We are not worried about it. And in the space that is available, we have to attach an abutment, and over the abutment comes a framework, and over the framework comes the restoration. It can be an acrylic restoration or a ceramic restoration. Again, that is totally a different topic, but you keep in mind that there are 3 components which is going to come. So 3 components for the maxilla, 3 components for the mandible, and you need to have space to accommodate all the 6 components. As you can see, the denture that I have showed on the left, you can see this is the framework, this is the abutment, and this is the restorative space. You see a reduced restorative space. But you can see in this lower one, again the framework, but you have increased restorative space. So based on the availability of restorative space, you decide the restoration, and based on the restoration, you design the number of implants. So it always happens in the reverse. This is reverse engineering. So you can see in this particular radiograph, the one I have restored with 6 implants in the upper arch. So this is the level of the implant and a reduced space. So all I can do is place porcelain fused to metal, a cement retained restoration in this. So for that restoration, I require 6 implants. So this is how an all on 6 is done. And this is one case where there was adequate restorative space. So you can see after the implant, I've got space for the multi-unit abutment, then the restoration, then the framework and the restoration over it. So you need to have good restorative space for all on 4 treatment plan to be effective. So this is one such case where you can see all on 6 has been done according to Kolmisch protocol. Kolmisch protocol is that you have primary implant sites and secondary implant sites. The primary implant sites are the one where implants in the central incisors, canine, and the first molar region. So these are all the places where you have to place your primary implants. And maybe if you feel your restoration is going to have some more load, you can always place implants at the secondary sites as well. So once after doing that, you can see the impression is made, 3 months of integration. The impression is made, a framework is done, and the final restoration is placed. You can see the occlusion of the existing tooth. So you have very less restorative space to play with. So such cases will be, the all on 4 treatment option will be a very bad treatment option. So just for comparison, I would like to show one more all on 4 case. You can see good restorative space present between the maxillary arch and the crestal ridge. And the most common indication, or these are all the criteria for you to go for an all on 4 restoration, is that you should have posterior atrophic ridge. So only when the posterior is atrophic, you can go for an all on 4 restoration. This atrophy will give you that increased restorative space. And the most important criteria which many miss out is from the inferior alveolar canal, the crestal ridge of the mandible, the distance between these two has to be 5 to 6 millimeter at least. So only if 5 to 6 millimeter of bone is present in this region, you will be able to tilt the implant and take the implant exit as posteriorly as possible. So the success of all on 4 restoration depends on how posteriorly you take this angulation back. So ideally, it is supposed to reach the first molar region, but anywhere in between the second premolar and first molar is ideal. So only if you can do that and you have good restorative space, can you go for an all on 4 restoration. As you can see in this, the anterior exit is at the lateral canine region and the posterior exit at the molar region. So ideally, this is how it needs to be done. These are all the requisite for an all on 4 case. If you follow all these protocols, your complications will be very minimal. And always keep in mind, reducing the number of implant is not going to reduce the cost for the patient, because the last implant that you tilt, for getting the prosthetic component to get parallel to each other, you need to attach something called as a multi-unit abutment. This multi-unit abutment comes at an extra cost. So this extra cost needs to be kept in mind when you're planning an all-on-4, and it will come to almost the cost of an all-on-6 restoration. So all-on-4 is never going to be cheaper. So the fifth one that I would like to talk about is the osseointegration versus osseofixation concept. You can see the osseofixation concepts have been coming up lately, and you get confused about what to choose. I would like to tell that these both are based on entirely different concepts. The implant that we use in osseointegration, implant that you use in osseointegration totally based on biologic integration that is happening in the endosseous part of the bone, whereas the osseofixation uses the basal cortical component of the bone. The basal cortical component is much less vascular compared to the endosteal component, and it is very much resistant to resorption. And that is why this concept has become much more popular now, because most of the cases in atrophic ridges, you may not have sufficient endosseous bone, and you will have to use bicortical anchorage for you to have a good restoration. So like what Dr. Saurabh was discussing yesterday, for you to have a good superstructure, you need to have a good substructure. So the substructure target with the osseointegration concept is to have a good integration base, and with osseofixation, the same integration or substructure concept is achieved by anchoring it in the basal bone. End of the day, keep the patient's form and function in mind. When with this formulated treatment, it is not osseointegration versus osseofixation. A lot of things, these two desirable biological aspects can be combined, and a lot of pioneers like Dr. Johnson Raja sir, Dr. Vegatnak sir have been speaking about this TT-fill or 6-fix concept, where endosseous implant, they use a longer endosseous implant and tilt it intentionally to get anchorage in two cortical layer. So this bicortical fixation as well as osseointegration concept can be combined and used with these endosseous implants also. So coming to the prosthetic part, I'm going to discuss about again 5 topics here. The first one is closed versus open tray. For simple restorations, for restoration of single tooth or 2 implant 3-unit bridges, I usually recommend or go for closed tray impression method, plainly because this is easy to understand, very similar to how we take a fixed partial denture impression. So all you have to do is remove the healing cap, placement of the closed tray impression. How do you differentiate? The closed tray impression has a flat surface for orientation and has got orientation grooves. Remember, it has got orientation grooves, whereas the open tray has got retentive grooves. So the orientation grooves on the flat surface is placed labially. Impression is taken. I mean, before impression, it is always important to take a radiograph to see how good it is fitting with the implant. Then you may take a closed tray impression, is like just like how you take a fixed partial denture impression. And once you pick the impression coping's replica is there in the impression material. So this impression replica is again detached from the patient mouth, attached to the analog, and this is made into a single piece and is put back inside the impression. So this is how the closed tray impression is made. And open tray impression, I usually reserve it for full mouth rehabilitation cases. So this is an open tray impression transfer. You can see these retentive components. It is always better to splint the open tray with a patterned resin. And once it's splinted together, you need to use trays like this. These are plastic trays which can be opened up or cut wherever necessary. And this, because you're opening up the tray, this is called an open tray impression. Then the open area is covered with a wax sheet. And once the impression is made, you just have to press it with a finger, and the long retentive pins that are present in the open tray transfer juts out of this wax. Make sure before the impression sets, you have to make sure that all the screw posts are seen outside. So then what you do is you remove the screw post, and once you pick the impression post is transferred along with the impression, and you retrofit the impression coping. So you might find this a little bit more tricky, and you need more practice to master this art of open tray impression. So if you're a beginner, I would prefer you, or I would advise you to go for a closed tray impression rather than an open tray impression. So the next most thing is the implant level and abutment level restoration, which is something which you need to decide clinically. So just for the purpose of understanding, I have showed you the both simultaneously side by side. The first one is a closed impression coping, which is directly connected to the implant inside. So the restoration that you make over this is going to be an implant level restoration. The second one, the black dotted line shows the anatomic abutment, which is fixed inside the implant. Over the anatomic abutment, you place something called as a you place a cap like this. A nylon cap is placed like this, which has got retentive components. So once the impression is made, this particular portion is replicated inside the implant, but in this, the plastic coping gets transferred. So it gets transferred, and the recording that is made here is an abutment level recording, and the recording that is made here is an implant level recording. So another way of getting the implant level recording is by use of this multi-unit abutment. Is very important, as I showed you in my earlier slides. All the all-on-4 respirations cannot be completed without the presence of multi-unit abutment. So this is the multi-unit abutment, as you can see in this picture. The implant, once the multi-unit abutment is attached, the restoration level is brought to the mucosa, brought above the mucosa. So making an impression of anything that is above the mucosa, it is very easy compared that is inside the mucosa. So making an impression is going to be very easy. But again, the catch point here is you need to have adequate restorative space, so this multi-unit abutment is going to occupy some amount of vertical height, and only if this restorative space is available can you go for this kind of restoration. So again, I'm comparing the this is the abutment level impression or restoration. This is the implant level impression. You can see mucosa. You need to record the details of implant present below this mucosa. This is a little bit tricky. So if you attach an abutment and bring this recordable component above the mucosa, life will be very easy for you. And from the patient's perspective also, meddling with this mucosa, meddling with the mucosa here can cause pain and discomfort to the patient, which is almost avoided or zero when you do a restoration on the implant level. So the next one is the cement versus screw retain. What I would prefer, I would like to make a statement. I always go for screw retain restoration wherever possible. And the only indication for, the two indications for a cement retain restoration is if my implant angulation has gone wrong, and if the implant exit is going to come labially, especially in the anterior regions. So if it is going to come labial, you are going to have a tough time to camouflage the entrance or so that these are all the two indications where I normally go for cement retained restoration. Again, cement retained restoration requires to have increased restorative space, whereas a cement retained restoration need not have so much of restorative space, again being one of the indication and contraindication for both. And you can see the angulation has been corrected at lab. This is possible with a cement retained restoration. It can be brought parallel to each other, and the abutments, once after being milled, it is transferred to the patient's mouth. A Teflon is packed and it is sealed with a flowable composite or a Ketak molar. So once you've done that, it is just like two abutments in place and luting your fixed partial denture. Very simple. So this is the FPD in place, a cement retained restoration in place. Whereas screw retained, you can see after the healing cap below the, this implant level restoration, an open tray or closed tray impression is taken, and you make a restoration like this. The abutment and the porcelain fused metal is combined together, and you have an access coal which is coming outside. So this comes as a single block which is placed in position, verified on your X-ray, and positioned like this. As you can see, this is going to be a little bit more cumbersome than your cement retained restoration, because cement retained is again very similar to your FPD. So it is your domain. You know how to handle complications in that. Whereas screw retained is going to involve a lot of expertise. But I would advise you to get trained or practice your restorations by practice your restorations or give more of screw retained processes in your practice, because the complication rates are very reduced in cement retained, and managing them is also is very easy. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you are going to use screw retained processes, when you are going to replace multiple implant restoration, the abutment that comes with a regular implant cannot be used. The abutment that is provided with an implant is always a engaging component which is there at the neck. So the abutment that comes with your regular implant, you cannot use that for a multiple screw retain implant restoration. You need to go for something called as a non-engaging abutment. So this non-engaging abutment might cost you extra. Keep that in mind when you plan screw retain bridges. So why I advise you to go for cement retain, go for screw retain rather than cement retain is because of this. This is a video I showed in the beginning of my lecture, and this I'm going to show you how easy it is to manage if such a complication happens in your practice. So this is a screw retain crown. You can see it shaking. All you have to do is remove the entrance filling. So this is entrance filling which was done with flowable composite. Remove it with a handpiece. Remove the Teflon tape, and you have direct access to the screw that is used for tightening. So if the screw is not worn out, it is better. I mean, if it is worn out, it is better to change the screw. So all you have to do is use your hex driver, tighten it again, put the Teflon back inside, seal it. So the tightening can happen. That's all you will have to, that's all the chairside time that you have to spend for this patient. But imagine if this was being a cement retain crown, you have no idea of where the access hole is going to be, and it is a nightmare to drill through the metal. So managing the complication, anticipate this complication. This complication can happen to anybody, and try to keep the management of the complication as simple as possible. And for this very reason, we always recommend you to go for screw retain processes. And to avoid screw loosening from happening, this is what we have been doing for quite some time now. I always do it with an engine controlled hex driver. I don't do hand tightening, and of late I have stopped using the ratchet tightening also. I set the torque levels in tightening, and I do the torquing in a progressive manner. Progressive manner, I mean, I start with 20 newtons, wait for a few seconds, then go for 25 again, wait for a few seconds, and then do the final 30 newtons. So this waiting allows for dissipation of the stress that might accumulate between the abutment and the bone interface. And once after the dissipation, if you do the final tightening, the incidence of screw loosening later on will be drastically reduced. So small video, you can see I start with 20 newtons. So the first abutment is tightened at 20, second abutment is tightened at 20. Then you go for either 25. In this particular case, I went for a 30 Newton torque. Wait for some time. Do the torquing at 30 newtons. First one, second one, and then you place the implant. So especially in the cement retain, because you cannot afford a abutment loosening when you are planning for a cement retain restoration. So it is better to avoid complication. Follow this protocol. We have got very minimal complication when this protocol has been followed. So one highlight, I mean, this is the last point that I would like to talk to you, or the implant occlusion. Implant occlusion is something which you should know, and you should question your implant, the restorative labs also. A lab should have good idea about what an implant occlusion is. So implant occlusion is nothing but a little bit of the crown being set out of occlusion. Why? Because the implant and the root is going to have periodontal ligament surrounding it, and the periodontal ligament is something which is not there on the implant. So the implant will not have physiologic migration which is possible in the natural tooth. So when you are chewing, the tooth will move or intrude a little bit physiologically, and the implant crown is supposed to come in contact with the opposing tooth only after this physiologic intrusion is over. So this is something which is very important, and you need to give the restoration to a lab who understands this concept and makes the implant crown accordingly. So you can see in this, at rest, you will have a little bit of gap in between the implant restoration and the opposing tooth. So this will come in contact only when the physiologic intrusion in the natural tooth is over. So this is why I told you choosing your lab is very important.
Kindly wind up the presentation, sir.
Yeah, just 2 more slides. Can I
Sure.
finish with that?
Please, sir, please. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Yeah. So mastering the surgical and prosthetic aspect of implant, this is definitely taming the untamable, but that has been the uniqueness of our culture, and we are very good at it. So to sign off with a chill, I shared you my recipe at the beginning. I'm going to share you one more recipe: milk and some root syrup with a little bit of ice cream. And you may tell, this is a Faluda. Faluda is a statement, but you come to this part of India. This is called Jigardanda. It's one of the delicacies or savories of Madurai. So after doing so much of implant restorations, I thought it is better to train people who are interested in incorporating implant practice in their clinic. So I started an academy where I train young people, and we run our academy with a unique selling point of providing basic training in implantology, allowing our participants in one single day. Yes, we don't have any modules. All this is being done in a single day.